Take off that medal before speaking to this court.
The judge's voice echoed through the room, sharp, cold, final. The old man standing at the witness stand didn't move. His hands trembled slightly. He wore a faded blue blazer, and on his chest, right above his heart, gleamed a silver star. People in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably. Some lowered their eyes, others smirked. But he didn't speak. He simply looked at the judge, not with defiance, but with decades of weight behind his silence. Then, someone stood up. From the very back of the courtroom, a man in full military dress uniform, chest heavy with ribbons, eyes like steel, raised his hand and said only 5 words.
Permission to speak, Your Honor.
What happened next ended the judge's career and reminded an entire nation what honor truly means. The courthouse was unusually full that morning, not because of the case itself, a civil dispute over a property easement, but because of who was expected to take the stand. Word had spread quietly through town, not through newspapers or local broadcasts, but through whispers. Whispers that a man, the man, was going to testify. He had walked in without speaking to anyone, no lawyer by his side, no family. Just a modest posture, a worn pair of black shoes, and that faded blue blazer that seemed older than some of the lawyers in the room. The medal on his chest wasn't pinned with showmanship. It simply was there, steady, silent, absolute, a silver star, the second highest military decoration for valor in combat. Most people had never seen one in person, but the judge didn't look impressed. Judge Harold Whitmore was known for his discipline, for his contempt of theatrics, and most of all, for his intolerance of anything that didn't fit into his vision of a courtroom, a vision that had no room for sentimentality. He had climbed the ladder the hard way, they said. Military service? None. But ambition? Plenty. He entered from his chambers like he always did, stiff, efficient, unsmiling, and as he sat down, his eyes locked onto the only thing in the room that didn't move, the medal on that man's chest. He didn't say anything right away. He waited for the moment the veteran would be called to the stand, and he would have the authority and the spotlight to assert control. From the gallery, people watched with silent curiosity. Some were there for the case. Most were not. Most had come just to see him. This older man, in his late 70s at least, who had never spoken publicly about his service. His name wasn't plastered in textbooks. He had no TV interviews, no grand speeches on Memorial Day. Just a presence, and a silence that carried weight. When the bailiff called his name, "Mr. Joseph Emery, please take the stand," the room grew quieter than it should have. He stood slowly, with the deliberate care of someone who'd learned long ago never to rush anything. Each step toward the witness chair felt like a procession. He didn't look around, didn't acknowledge the whispers. He just stepped forward and stood. That's when the judge leaned forward, tilted his head slightly, and said it. "Before you begin, remove that medal. This is a courtroom, not a parade." There was a pause, the kind of pause that stretches through bone. You could hear someone in the back clear their throat. A woman gasped. One of the lawyers even shifted uneasily. Joseph didn't respond. He just looked at the judge with a gaze that wasn't angry. It was exhausted, heavy, unmoving. The judge, not used to silence, leaned back and repeated himself. "I said, remove the medal, Mr. Emery, or you will not be permitted to speak." And that's when something changed, not in Joseph, but in the room. A stillness settled, as if something ancient and unspoken had just been touched. In the far corner, someone began to stand up. But that comes later. For now, Joseph's hand slowly reached for the back of the Silver Star's pin. And the courtroom watched, breathless, as the weight of decades was quietly unpinned and placed on the wooden ledge beside the microphone, like a flag being folded without ceremony. Joseph Emery sat, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes locked somewhere between the witness stand and the distant memories behind it. The Silver Star lay next to the microphone, lifeless and out of place, a symbol stripped of its dignity by a man in a black robe. The courtroom remained uncomfortably quiet. The judge, satisfied with the removal of what he had deemed a distraction, shifted in his chair and gestured toward the attorney. "You may proceed," he said curtly. The attorney nodded, almost too quickly, and approached the stand. "Mr. Emery," he began, Could you please state your name and occupation for the record? Joseph didn't move at first. Then slowly, in a voice that carried more gravel than volume, he said, Joseph Francis Emery, retired, former aircraft mechanic and United States Army, 1st Cavalry Division. He said the last part not with pride, but with precision, like facts carved in stone. And Mr. Emery, were you present at the location during the dispute being examined today? Yes, Joseph answered. The questions continued, mundane and procedural. But the air wasn't the same. Every sentence that came out of Joseph's mouth was colored by the metallic presence lying next to him, the thing that had been removed. The courtroom should have been focused on easement rights, land boundaries, survey maps. But it wasn't. It was focused on him, or rather, on the way he had been treated. Some people looked at the judge, some at the floor, a few at Joseph himself, now answering questions with slow, deliberate clarity. He didn't fumble. He didn't pause. Every answer came with the same quiet strength of someone who had lived through things far more complex than legal clauses. At one point, the opposing counsel stood and objected to a question, more out of habit than strategy, and the judge seized the moment like a hammer. Let's not waste time here, Judge Whitmore said. This isn't a war memorial. It's a courtroom. We deal in facts, not sentiment. That line did something. People looked up. There was a brief collective shift. A pulse of discomfort ran through the room like a draft under a sealed door. Someone in the second row leaned forward. A woman clutched her handbag a little tighter. The judge wasn't finished. I don't care how many medals someone's collected, he said, glancing toward the silver star without naming it. You want respect? Follow the rules. It was cruel, plainly, undeniably cruel. But more than that, it was deliberate. And for the first time since the proceeding began, Joseph turned his head and looked directly at Judge Whitmore, not with anger, but with that same heavy silence from before, a silence that was older than the room itself. The attorney cleared his throat and tried to continue. Mr. Emery, in your own words, can you explain what happened that day? Joseph blinked once, then nodded. I arrived at the property line around 6:30. The gate was unlocked, as it always had been. I was meeting my neighbor, Mr. Collins, to check the irrigation channel. He'd called me 2 days prior to say the runoff had flooded near the fence. And what did you see when you arrived? Joseph's voice remained steady. 2 men in suits, not Collins. They were measuring the boundary line with a laser device. I asked them what they were doing. One of them told me I didn't have permission to be there anymore. And did you? I've had a key to that gate since 1989. Collins gave it to me himself, said I was free to cross that land as I pleased. Why would he do that? Because his brother was my crew chief, and he never came home. Silence. That sentence landed like a dropped weight on glass. The attorney paused. He didn't need to add anything. He turned to the judge, indicating he had no further questions for now. The judge didn't look moved. He leaned back in his chair, visibly annoyed. Is the witness finished? The opposing counsel stood. Briefly, Your Honor. He walked to the stand, casual and smug. Younger, slick. A man of expensive pens and perfect suits. He smiled as he asked, Mr. Emery, would you agree that memories fade with time? Joseph raised an eyebrow, just slightly. I remember who died under me. I don't forget those names. There it was again. That stillness. The lawyer blinked, smiled again, but less confidently. No further questions? Joseph nodded once. The judge gestured for him to step down. Joseph stood, turned, and paused for a brief second at the railing of the witness stand. His eyes drifted toward the silver star, still sitting there. He didn't reach for it. He left it behind. And that's when it happened. From the far side of the gallery, a man in full military dress uniform stood. No one had seen him enter. No one had noticed him take a seat. He had remained still until that very moment. Then slowly, with purpose, he stepped forward and spoke 4 words that stopped the room cold. Your Honor, may I speak? The man's voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried like authority does, not through volume, but through weight. The courtroom turned in unison. Even those who had looked bored moments before were now wide-eyed. He wore a formal U.S. Army service uniform, deep green with perfect creases. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, his chest lined with medals that glinted under the sterile neon lighting. Among them, unmistakably, sat the Medal of Honor. He didn't move toward the front. He simply stood where he was, hands behind his back, posture straight, expression unreadable. The judge, caught off guard, shifted in his seat and leaned forward slightly, squinting as if trying to place the man. There was a pause, the kind of pause that doesn't feel like silence, but like pressure building in a sealed room. The man repeated calmly, "May I speak, Your Honor?" There was tension in the air now, thick and unspoken. Whitmore, visibly uncomfortable but unwilling to show it, adjusted his glasses. "This is a court of law," he said, "unless you've been subpoenaed or are legal counsel." "I am neither," the man said simply. "But I served 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, and I have a right to address this room when a decorated veteran is humiliated on the stand." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of presence. The judge hesitated. The courtroom was no longer with him. People weren't looking at Joseph anymore. They weren't looking at the attorneys. Every set of eyes, every breath, was trained on the man in uniform. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, a man in the back row stood up, then another. Both veterans, both silent, both standing not in protest, but in recognition. One removed his cap. Another crossed his arms with quiet solidarity. Whitmore sensed the shift. His face twitched, like a man trying to reassert control in a room that no longer recognized his authority. "This is highly irregular," he muttered. "The court does not permit—" "I knew Joseph Emery," the man interrupted, his tone steady. "Before he wore that medal, he wore blood, not his own. The blood of the men he dragged from a burning helicopter in Cambodia. I was one of them." The silence was absolute. Not even breathing could be heard. He continued, not with emotion, but with precision. "He's not here to brag. He never has. I've watched him refuse interviews, awards, recognition. But what you did today, Your Honor, wasn't about courtroom decorum. It was about power, about your discomfort with something you never earned." Whitmore opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. His lips trembled. The man stepped forward now, slowly, each boot echoing across the tile floor. He approached the witness stand, picked up the silver star with both hands, and held it for a moment, as if the medal itself carried weight beyond its composition. Then he turned and faced the room. "This," he said, lifting it gently, "is not jewelry. It is not decoration. It is a grave marker that happens to shine." He turned to Joseph, who had not moved. "You didn't remove it. You surrendered it, and that's what hurts the most." Then, for the first time, Joseph stood again. The 2 men faced each other without speaking, then embraced, not theatrically, not performatively, but as soldiers do when silence says more than language allows. When they stepped apart, Joseph took the medal back, but this time he didn't pin it on. He simply held it in his hand. The man in uniform turned to the judge. "You've embarrassed a war hero in public court, in front of his peers, his community, and your staff. The consequences of that choice aren't mine to deliver. They're already on their way." He turned and walked toward the exit. But as he did, one by one, people in the audience stood, not clapping, not chanting, simply rising, in silence, a form of testimony that the court itself could no longer control. And Judge Harold Whitmore, for the first time in 20 years on the bench, looked very, very small. The courtroom was dismissed early that day. Officially, it was for procedural review, but everyone knew it was because Judge Whitmore could no longer speak with authority. As the crowd slowly exited, Joseph remained seated, still holding the silver star in his hand. He didn't seem triumphant, just tired. The man in uniform had vanished as quietly as he had appeared. No name, no title announced, no need to linger. His presence had already rewritten the room's history. Outside, the crowd dispersed into clusters, murmuring in disbelief, anger, admiration. Reporters hadn't been allowed inside the courtroom, but word spreads faster than headlines when truth is involved. By nightfall, the story had already reached national veterans networks. By morning, it was viral. Clips recorded on phones showed the moment the decorated officer stood, the silence in the courtroom, the weight in his words. Some focused on Joseph's face, others on the judge's. None of it needed editing. Reality had delivered its own script. By the end of the week, a formal complaint was filed against Judge Whitmore by the State Judicial Conduct Board. Veterans organizations across the country joined in. A signed statement from over 200 active duty and retired officers demanded public accountability. Sponsors pulled out of his re-election campaign. Public figures, including one sitting senator, called his behavior a disgrace to the robe. He gave no interview, no apology. He simply disappeared from the bench the following Monday, his name removed from the court schedule. A press release from the courthouse said he had chosen early retirement for personal reasons. But everyone knew the truth. What was supposed to be a routine civil hearing had revealed something much deeper, a rift between power and principle, and the court had chosen wrong. Joseph Emery never returned to that courtroom. He didn't need to. His silence had already spoken louder than anything he could have testified. A month later, a photo circulated online, grainy, taken from a distance, no location tagged. It showed Joseph standing alone before a memorial wall, dressed in the same blue blazer. The medal was pinned again to his chest, not with defiance, but with peace. Behind him, in the background, stood a younger man, the same one from the courtroom, watching without speaking, as if guarding something sacred. The courthouse never acknowledged what happened. No plaque, no statement, just silence. The same kind of silence that filled the room that day, when justice tried to silence honor and honor stood taller. Joseph Emery never spoke to the press. When asked by a local reporter if he wanted to share his side, he simply said, "There's nothing to explain." He went back to his quiet life. Same house, same pickup truck, same old chair by the window. He still walked with a slight limp, still kept a folded flag in a wooden case above the fireplace. And the silver star? He didn't wear it anymore. But he never put it away either. It rested on a small wooden stand under glass, not to display glory, but to remember those who never came home. But across the country, something had shifted. The story of what happened that day began circulating in military forums, legal ethics conferences, and even classrooms. A moment where the law tried to diminish the past, and the past responded quietly, with more dignity than any gavel ever held. As for Judge Whitmore, he faded into obscurity. His legacy was reduced to a single clip, replayed 1,000,000 times online, a man in robes ordering silence, and then being silenced by something far older and far greater than himself. Sometimes justice doesn't need a ruling. Sometimes it walks in wearing a uniform, says 5 quiet words, and changes everything.